I told Caspian I was a ghost. I told him my hands were stained with blood long before I ever touched his car. But as the Vance Empire's assassins close in on our mountain sanctuary, I realize being a ghost isn't enough. I have to be the monster they're afraid of. The storm is here, the secrets are out, and the man I'm sworn to protect is the only reason my heart is still beating. I'm Jackson Vane, and today the hunters become the hunted. This is the final chapter of our survival on Gay Stories Chronicles. The Empire is about to find out exactly what happens when you try to take what belongs to a man who has nothing left to lose. The wind didn't just howl around the cabin, it screamed like a wounded beast. A mountain snowstorm had rolled in faster than I'd anticipated, burying the world in a blinding sheet of white. The old cedar logs of my sanctuary groaned under the pressure, but inside, the only sound was the crackle of the fire and the unsteady rhythm of Caspian's breathing. He was sitting on the floor, wrapped in a thick wool blanket I'd pulled from the cedar chest. The firelight played across his pale skin, making him look even more like a ghost than the day he'd skidded into my life. He was staring at the strip of silk he'd tied around my arm earlier, now stained dark with my blood. "You're staring at it again," I said, my voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate in the small room. I sat on the hearth, the heat of the flames at my back, but I felt a different kind of chill. Caspian looked up, his gray eyes searching mine. "They knew you, Jackson. Those men in the garage, they didn't just see a mechanic. They saw a monster they were afraid of. Who are you? Really?" I looked at my hands. They were calloused, scarred, and stained with the grease of 1,000 engines. But beneath the grease, there was blood that would never truly wash off. "I grew up in a place where you didn't have a name, you had a number," I began, the words feeling like shards of glass in my throat. "I was recruited into a black bag unit before I was old enough to vote. They told us we were the invisible shield. They told us we were heroes, but heroes don't do the things I did, Caspian." I stood up and walked to the window, watching the snow bury the Bronco. "My unit was called the Erasers. When a corporate empire like your father's had a problem, a person who knew too much, a rival who wouldn't sell, a scandal that couldn't be silenced, they called us. We didn't just fix problems, we made them disappear." I heard the soft rustle of the blanket as Caspian stood up. He walked toward me, but he didn't stop until he was standing right behind me. I could feel the heat radiating from his body. "I spent 10 years being a weapon for men who had too much power and not enough soul," I continued, my voice dropping to a whisper. "I've seen how your father's world works from the inside. I've seen the bodies buried under the foundations of those glass skyscrapers. And then, 3 years ago, I was told to erase a journalist. She was 24. She had a daughter." I closed my eyes, the memory of that night in Berlin flashing behind my eyelids, the cold rain, the crosshairs, the moment I realized I couldn't pull the trigger. I didn't do it. Instead, I erased my unit. I burned every file, every server, and I vanished. I thought if I moved to a town like Blackwood and fixed tractors for the rest of my life, I could pretend the man I was didn't exist. I thought I could be a ghost. I turned around to face him, expecting to see horror. I expected him to shrink away from the man who had admitted to being a professional killer. Instead, Caspian was looking at me with a profound, aping sadness. He reached out, his small, warm hand resting against my scarred chest, right over my heart. "We're both ghosts, Jackson," he whispered. "My father tried to turn me into a machine, and your handlers tried to turn you into a blade. But look at us. We're still breathing. We're still here." "I have a body count, Caspian," I rasped, my hands shaking as I resisted the urge to pull him into my arms. "I'm the kind of man your father hires to do his dirty work.
I'm not the hero in this story." Caspian stepped closer, forcing me to look him in the eye. "You're the man who bled for me today. You're the man who gave up his peace to save a stranger. My father hires killers, Jackson, but he doesn't hire men who love." The word love hung in the air between us, heavier than the snow outside. I'd spent my life avoiding that word. In my world, love was a vulnerability. Love was a way for an enemy to get leverage. But as I looked at Caspian, this beautiful, broken, defiant boy, I realized that I was already compromised. I would kill for him. I would die for him. And, most terrifyingly, I would live for him.
Caspian. I didn't finish the sentence. I couldn't. I reached out, my large hands cupping his face. He felt so fragile. Yet, as he leaned into my touch, he felt like the strongest thing I'd ever encountered. I pulled him into a kiss that wasn't about adrenaline or survival. It was an apology for my past and a promise for his future. It was a slow, deep burn that pushed back the cold of the mountain storm. He moved against me, his fingers tangling in my hair, pulling me closer as if he could merge our souls and erase the scars on both of us. For the first time in 3 years, the noise in my head went quiet. The nightmares retreated. We eventually pulled apart, breathless, the only light in the room coming from the dying embers of the fire. "They'll keep coming, you know," I said, my forehead resting against his. "My old unit, they don't like loose ends, and your father won't stop until he has those encryption keys." Caspian smiled, a small, genuine expression that transformed his face. "Let them come. They're looking for a spoiled heir and a retired mechanic." I caught his drift, a dark smirk tugging at the corners of my mouth. "And what are they going to find?" Caspian's eyes flashed with a new kind of fire. "They're going to find out what happens when you hunt a man who has nothing left to lose, and a man who finally has something worth fighting for." I looked at the 9mm sitting on the table, then back at the boy in my arms. The deadly past was out in the open now. There were no more secrets. We were two ghosts in a storm, waiting for the world to find us. But this time, I wasn't running. I was waiting. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world of blinding white and deafening silence. But for a man with my training, the silence didn't mean peace. It meant the enemy was repositioning. I stood at the cabin window, watching the tree line through a pair of thermal binoculars. 2 heat signatures were moving steadily through the brush, 300 yards out. "They're early," I muttered. Caspian was behind me, checking the seals on the windows. He had traded his ruined cashmere for one of my heavy flannel shirts. It was 3 sizes too big for him, hanging off his frame, but he didn't look like a victim anymore. He looked like a man who had decided he was done being a pawn. "How many?" Caspian asked, his voice steady. 4 in the first wave. Probably a sniper team on the ridge," I replied, setting the binoculars down. I looked at him, my amber eyes hardening. "This is the moment, Caspian. Once I pull this trigger, there's no going back to Blackwood. There's no more fixing tractors. It's us against your father's empire until one of us stops breathing." Caspian walked over to me, his hand finding mine. He squeezed it, his grip surprisingly firm. "I stopped breathing the day I was born into that family, Jackson. You're the one who taught me how to start again. Do what you have to do." I nodded, the old, cold focus of the eraser settling over me like a suit of armor. I didn't want this life back, but if I had to become a monster one last time to protect the only beautiful thing I'd ever owned, I'd do it gladly. I reached under the floorboards and pulled out a heavy Pelican case. Inside sat a suppressed M4 carbine and a series of proximity mines. "Stay in the basement crawl space," I commanded.
If the floorboards above you go quiet for more than 10 minutes, take the emergency bag and the snowmobile in the shed. Head north. Don't look back." "Jackson, promise me," I growled, grabbing the back of his neck and pulling him into a hard, desperate kiss. "I promise," he whispered against my lips.
I watched him disappear into the floor hatch. Then I stepped out into the freezing mountain air. I didn't wear a white camo suit. I didn't need one. I knew these woods better than the men coming for us. I was a part of this mountain. I moved like a ghost through the pines, circling behind the first two mercenaries. They were moving in a tactical diamond formation, high-end gear and suppressed rifles. They were good, but they were used to urban environments. They weren't used to a man who could blend into the shadows of a cedar tree. I let them get within 50 yards of the cabin. Then I clicked the remote in my pocket. Boom! The proximity mine I'd buried near the old logging bridge detonated, sending a spray of snow and debris into the air. It was a distraction. While they turned their heads toward the blast, I dropped from a low-hanging branch behind the tail-end man. I didn't use a bullet. I used my hands. A quick snap, a muffled groan, and he was down before his partner could blink. "Contact! We have contact!" the lead man hissed into his radio. I didn't give him time to coordinate. I moved through the brush, a lethal blur of black and gray. I took the second man out with a precise shot to the shoulder, disabling his weapon arm before finishing the job. But then, the red dot of a laser sight danced across my chest. Crack! The sniper on the ridge had found me. The bullet grazed my side, tearing through my jacket and drawing a line of fire across my ribs. I dove behind a rock, my breath coming in jagged gasps. "Vane!" a voice boomed over a loudspeaker from the ridge. It was the same cold monotone from the garage. "Give us the boy and we'll let you bleed out in peace. You're one man against a corporation. You know how this ends." I looked toward the cabin. I could see the corner of the basement window. Caspian was there, watching. He wasn't running. He was waiting for me. I checked my magazine. 3 rounds left. 1 sniper, 1 lead mercenary. "You're right," I yelled back, my voice echoing off the cliffs. "I do know how this ends. It ends with me standing over your bodies." I didn't run away from the sniper. I ran toward the cabin. I needed to draw them into the kill zone I'd rigged in the workshop. I burst through the back door, blood slicking my side, and slammed the bolt shut. "Jackson!" Caspian scrambled out of the hatch, his face white as a sheet. "You're hit!" "Doesn't matter," I said, leaning against the door. "They're coming. Caspian, the encryption keys, do you have them on you?" "Always," he said, pulling a small silver drive from around his neck. "Upload them," I commanded, pointing to my satellite laptop. "If we're going down, we're taking his empire with us. Set a timer. If I don't enter the bypass code in 5 minutes, every news outlet in the world gets your father's darkest secrets." Caspian's hands flew over the keys. Outside, the heavy boots of the mercenaries reached the porch. The door began to groan under the pressure of a battering ram. I stood in front of Caspian, my rifle raised, my body a human shield. I was a mechanic, I was a killer, I was a lover, and in this moment, on Gay Stories Chronicles, I was the only thing standing between a boy and his nightmare. "Ready?" I asked, looking back at him. Caspian finished the upload and stood up, standing shoulder to shoulder with me. "Ready." The door flew off its hinges. The front door didn't just open, it shattered. 2 men in tactical gear breached the cabin, their muzzles flashing in the dim light. I didn't give them a chance to breathe. I dropped the first one with a double tap to the chest, the suppressed cough of my rifle lost in the roar of the wind. The second man dove for cover behind my heavy oak table, but I was already moving. I didn't care about the pain in my side or the blood soaking my shirt. I was a force of nature, fueled by the terrifying realization that if I failed, Caspian's light would be snuffed out forever. "The upload, Caspian! Now!" I roared. Caspian slammed his hand onto the enter key. "It's gone, Jackson! It's live!" Across the world, on every major news server from New York to Tokyo, the Vance family's dirty secrets, the briberies, the illegal surveillance, the erasures began to bleed onto the screens of millions. The empire wasn't just shaking, it was vaporizing. The lead mercenary, the one with the cold voice, stepped into the doorway. He didn't raise his gun. He held a tablet, his face pale as he watched his employer's stock price plummet to zero in real time. The money that paid his salary was vanishing before his eyes. "It's over," I said, my rifle leveled at his head. "Your boss is a dead man walking. He can't pay you, he can't protect you. Drop the gun and walk away, and maybe you'll survive the federal raids." The man looked at the screen, then at me, then at Caspian. He saw the fire in the boy's eyes, the fire I had helped relight. With a curse, he dropped his weapon and backed into the snow, disappearing into the white void along with the rest of his team. They were professionals. They didn't work for free, and they certainly didn't die for a man who was now a broke criminal. Silence returned to the cabin, heavier than the snow. I slumped against the wall, my rifle clattering to the floor. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. I felt a pair of warm arms wrap around me, holding me upright. "Jackson, stay with me. Look at me," whispered Caspian, his voice thick with emotion. He guided me down to the floor, his hands frantic as he checked the wound on my side. I looked up at him and smiled. It wasn't the grim smirk of a soldier, but the tired, peaceful smile of a man who had finally finished his last job. "We did it, kid. The empire is gone." "No," Caspian said, tears finally spilling down his cheeks. "We are here. That's what matters." The air in the Pacific Northwest was crisp and clean, smelling of salt and pine. I leaned against the railing of the small wooden porch, a cup of coffee in my hand. My sides still ached when the weather changed, but the scars were healing. Behind me, I heard the familiar sound of a wrench hitting a metal tray. I turned to see Caspian emerging from the small shed we'd converted into a workshop. He was wearing a pair of old denim overalls, his face smudged with grease, and his silver-blonde hair pulled back. He looked nothing like an heir, and everything like the man he was always meant to be. "The tractor's fixed," he said, a proud grin lighting up his face. "Only took me 4 hours this time." I laughed, pulling him into the crook of my arm. I'd traded my black bag missions for a quiet life on the coast, fixing boats and teaching a billionaire's son how to get his hands dirty. "Not bad, Caspian, not bad at all," I whispered, kissing his forehead. The world still thought we were dead, or perhaps they'd just forgotten about us. To the public, Caspian Vance was a tragic mystery. To me, he was everything. I had spent my life as a weapon, a tool for destruction, but in the quiet of our new home, I realized I had finally fixed the one thing that mattered most. I had fixed a broken life, and in doing so, I had saved my own. I wasn't a ghost anymore. I was Jackson Vane, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for the storm. I was enjoying the sun. They say you can't outrun your past, but they never tell you what happens when you turn around and fight it. Caspian and I lost everything to the Vance Empire, but we found something much more valuable in the wreckage: each other. My name is Jackson Vane, and my deadly past is finally buried. This was our story on Gay Stories Chronicles. If you loved seeing Jackson and Caspian find their happily ever after against all odds, make sure to subscribe and join our community here at Gay Stories Chronicles. We tell the stories of men who fight for love, and we're just getting started. Jackson gave up everything to protect Caspian. If you had to choose between a life of quiet safety or a life of dangerous love, which would you pick? Tell us in the comments. We want to hear your heart.